This is Uday Kapoor. I'm a volunteer at the Computer History Museum, here to welcome Mr. Arjun Malhotra. He's a pioneer of the Indian IT industry. Welcome, Arjun.
Thank you.
So we want to start with your early life and take it from there.
Well, I was born in Calcutta. My maternal grandfather was a fairly well-known scientist. He was president of the Science Congress in 1954, and I grew up with him. In fact, he used to go for a walk in the morning around Victoria Memorial. We used to stay close by, and I used to hold his little finger and go, and basically, while he was talking, he'd tell me 2 plus 5, 3 plus 8, whatever. And so when I went to school, I was thrown out of the math class because when the teacher used to write it on the board, I would give her the answer. So I was thrown out of math as a disruptive influence and was sent to Bible knowledge. So that's how I grew up, basically. And
so let's go back. That's an interesting story. What type of scientist was your grandfather?
So he was a zoologist, basically, but expert on fishes, an ecologist, I think is the word they use.
Oh, yeah.
Probably India's best-known ecologist, even till today. And he had lots of medals and an Indian National Science Association and stuff. But we have something called the Science Congress, Indian National Science Congress, and he was the president of that in 1954.
And so, what about your parents? What were they doing?
So my dad was in the army. He was in the British Army. He was a King's Commission. Came from Burma. He was living in Burma. The army retreated to India during the Second World War, and he met my mother in Calcutta. My mother was a medical doctor, and they met in Calcutta and decided to get married. I think they got married in 1946.
So this was not an arranged marriage. This is your parents were.
Yes, it wasn't. Actually, what happened during the war, civilians had volunteered to house some of the troops, the army, and so my dad got allocated to my mother's house, basically.
I see.
That's how they met.
So you grew up in a very highly educated, education-oriented family.
Yes. It was very clear that you had to. Ultimately, the thinking was, and I grew up with that thinking, that look, as long as you're studying, the family will support you. But the minute you finished your studies, then you have to stand on your own feet. And the whole idea was to study. I mean, I never, till I left college or about to leave college, I guess till I left college, I never thought I would not get my doctorate. I mean, that was the thinking, because my grandfather had got his DSc in those days from Edinburgh in 1924. And so, that was supposedly the family tradition.
And your mother was a doctor?
Yes.
So what about siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger sister. She's 3 years younger. And she showed no interest in the sciences. And she actually did a master's in English literature. And then did lots of things after that. But basically, she wanted to stay in the liberal arts. And, I wish we had encouraged it more, because I remember in those days she said that people like Dylan Thomas and all will become really famous over time. And they were unknowns, and it was the pop culture, so to say, at that time. And I think she was right. Leonard Cohen, Dylan Thomas, she had identified all of them as potential kind of people who will become famous.
Great.
So I understand you studied at Doon School, which is a very prestigious school. When did you leave Calcutta to go to Doon School?
So my dad got transferred to Delhi. Actually, he left the army in the early 50s. He felt that the Indian army was not disciplined enough, if I use that term, because the British army was probably much more disciplined than the Indian army. And so he felt that wasn't his cup of tea. So he left, and since he was with the EME, the Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, that corps in the army, he then joined Dunlop's, the tire company, as an executive. And they transferred him to Delhi when I was 7 years old. So we moved to Delhi. It was easy for my mother. Doctors get jobs in government hospitals fairly easily. And she was, of course, her field was preventive and social medicine. So she wasn't a practicing doctor, she was a teaching doctor, and in the areas of family planning and public health, basically. So we came to Delhi when I was 7, joined St. Columbus, and then I think in the early 60s, my dad got pulled up, all the reserves got pulled back, especially with the Chinese aggression on the eastern border. And so he got pulled to the front. And my mother got a Ford Foundation fellowship to come to the Harvard School of Public Health for a year, I think 13 months it was. So both the kids had to go to residential schools.
What age were you at that time?
I was 12 and my sister was 9. And so I was sent to Doon, and she went to a place called Tara Hall in Simla, right? My mother came back a year and a bit later, and at that time, obviously, they couldn't afford 2 kids in boarding school, and I was close to my senior year at high school. So my sister got pulled to a day school in Delhi, Martyr Day, and I continued at Doon. So I finished there in 1964.
How was your experience at Doon?
Oh, it was fantastic. You make friends that last you a lifetime. It's no regrets at all. I loved my 4 years at Doon.
So was there any debate in terms of sending you off to, your 2 kids off to school and the parents gone out of the country? Was that something that...
my grandmother was there. We had some other family there. So, I don't think we ever thought about it that way. I mean, there was no option. My parents felt there was no option, and so off we went.
So you developed a liking for certain subjects, science or?
Yes, I've always felt comfortable with science. I've never felt comfortable with art, and so I guess it has to do with the way your brain is structured. But so my logic was, whenever I walked into a math test, I assumed that I had the right to get 100 out of 100. And that if I didn't, then I made some mistake. But I always walked in thinking that, I'll max this. It's not at least mentally I thought that. That's how I looked at math all the time. Math and chemistry, actually. Those are the 2 subjects I liked.
So after graduating from Doon School, then what was your next intention?
So then as I said, because of an incident earlier in my life where I had opened up a tape recorder and couldn't put it back, I decided I'd become an electronics engineer. And the IITs were, and I could have, in those days, if your parents knew someone, you could get into a college. That's how the structure was. But the IITs were on merit, and I decided that if I wanted to do engineering, I wanted to do it on merit, that I better be good enough to do it. So I decided to sit for the IIT joint entrance exam. And basically, all the 5 IITs at that time had electrical engineering, and 4 of them had light, current, and power systems. IIT Kharagpur had 2 departments. They had electrical engineering department, and they had electronics and electrical communication engineering. And so I figured they obviously had something different. And so that's why I opted for Kharagpur to do my
I see. So you had an option to select which IIT?
I did. Actually, I studied really hard for that exam. There were 30 seats in electronics and electrical communication. So I told myself that if I could get a rank of 30 or less, then no one can take my first choice away from me. I was a little nervous when I went for the interview because I got a 32nd rank. But, people in front of me were taking mechanical and stuff. So
yes, those days mechanical was the first choice. Yeah. I actually also had a choice to go to mechanical at IIT Delhi, but I opted to go to electronics.
Okay. So I've never studied that hard for an exam in my life, because I said I have to make it in the top 30 to get the choice. I didn't want it taken away from me. And
so is this a multi-day exam, these IIT?
It's a 2-day exam. So there are 4 papers. In our time, at least, there were 4 papers. You did math and English on the first day, and you did physics and chemistry on the second day. And I think when I did it I don't know the number, but the estimate is about 500,000 people sat for the exam. And they were going to take 1,400 students.
So were there particular professors or other people at the institute that were significant influencers for you going forward?
No, absolutely they were. They were, you know, I think in electronics itself, we had two professors really, both of whom had a major influence, and some of the assistant professors too. You know, we worked closely with them. I was General Secretary Sports in my final year. The two General Secretary Social Cultural, the two General Secretary Sports, the one Vice President of the Gymkhana. And the President of the Gymkhana was our head of department in electronics. So a lot of times, a lot of work got done in the department itself. We didn't have to go to the Gymkhana to do that work, which used to get the other people quite upset. But yes, Professor G.S. Sanyal, in fact, I endowed a school of telecommunication named after him at IIT Kharagpur. So if there is a Professor G.S. Sanyal School of Telecommunications. And the other professor who had a major influence was an assistant professor called M.N. Farooqui. And again, I've endowed a Center for Innovation at IIT Kharagpur, which is called the M.N. Farooqui Center for Innovation.
Wonderful. Did you find anything particularly fascinating or interesting? Did you get into computers, or what were the topics that drew your interest at that time?
So, you know, it's strange. When I did electronics, computers was an option, which I did not take. I took control systems. And my thinking at that time was that I was going to come here to either Stanford or Berkeley, do my PhD, and work for NASA and working on how to control satellite control, basically, which is what we had to do a thesis in our undergraduate, our Bachelor of Technology, which is what my thesis was, sample data control system. That was my plan when I was in college. So I mean, we had some basic courses in computers, but I took the control system, the Nyquist plots, and, you know, all that stuff, because that's what I thought I would do when I came here. What changed for me was I'd also decided the girl I wanted to get married to. And so when I talked to her father, he said, "Are you crazy? I can't get my daughter married to someone who doesn't have a job, a confirmed job."
So this is before you graduated?
After I graduated.
After that, yeah.
You know,
right.
Before graduation, you don't have any time
exactly.
to think about this.
Right.
And she's the sister of a very good friend of mine who studied with me at IIT. And so I decided to stay back, take a job, get confirmed within a year. It takes a year to get confirmed in India, then get married, and then come to the US. Because once you're married, then no one says anything, right? That was the thinking. What happened is I worked with a company called DCM, Delhi Cloth and General Mills Company Limited. They were probably the fourth largest private sector company in India based on revenue at that time. A conglomerate. They made textiles, they made food, they made rayon tire cord, they made chemicals, fertilizers, they made a whole lot of things. So joined them as what was called a senior management trainee. So
why did you choose them? I mean, they weren't doing electronics, right?
Yes, so why did I choose them? I had not even applied for any jobs. And I think my mother had sent me a cutting for this job when I was at IIT. And there was one line in her letter that I've never, and I'm a sucker for logic actually. There was that one line in her letter which said, interviews are like exams. The more you do, the better you are at them. And I thought that was sensible. It was logic that I thought was really good. And so just to acknowledge that logic, I filled up that form and I'd sent it to them. I hadn't even applied for any other jobs. So basically,
you were just going to interview and practice.
I wasn't even going to interview. I just applied just to acknowledge the logic of that line my mother had said in her letter.
No, actually, I just wanted to interject a little bit. Since I was in the IIT around the same time, at a different IIT, I remember exactly the same things. For example, the topic of control theory was, most people wanted to take that. It was very mathematical and people liked that. And also the war, you know, the Pakistan war. And I think I read something about your experience. So that's very interesting. And the selection of the DCM, I remember that too as being one of the desirable companies to work for. So
Yes.
there's something interesting that I experienced the same thing.
Yeah, no, it was considered one of the one of the jobs a lot of people wanted. So, I think ultimately what happened is, I think 30,000 people apply. They take 8 to 12 people, So again, it's one of those things that once you get into that thing and you get past the first stage, then it becomes an ego thing that, hey, can I get to the end?
Right.
And
you were only going to be there for a year anyway.
That's what I had
It didn't
thought,
matter, right?
What happened in DCM was they decided to get into electronics. And I got called by the executive director, Vinay Bharatram, who was Dr. Bharatram's son. And he told me that, look, we don't have too many electronics engineers in the company. So you're one of them, you're a management trainee, obviously we trust you, all that stuff. But you're either going to head our sales and marketing, or you're going to head production and R&D, depending on who we can find in the market. Now, they did get a production person from Indian Telephone Industries. And so I was told that you're going to head the field operations, which is maintenance, sales, stuff like that. And so I thought to myself, 1 year out of college, I'm being given national responsibility for this new thing that this big company is doing. Well, where am I going to get this opportunity? So I deferred my admission to Stanford and actually basically to Stanford by another year.
You had already applied and had been accepted.
I'd applied, I'd got a fellowship, and then when I deferred it for 1 year, they said you'll have to reapply for aid. My GRE numbers were pretty good, so I thought it wouldn't be a problem. I actually deferred it for 5 years. Then they said you got to do your GRE again, and said, hey, that's not going to happen. But basically, that's what happened. So we took on this electronic calculator thing. We built a really strong development group.
So what year was this?
1971. And we launched our calculators in early 72. I remember Munich Olympics, same year. I remember that.
And were these basic four-function calculators? Were these complex math calculators?
We had to go through a number of them. What happened was all these were startups here, and they were failing fairly fast. So we first used the Varadine 7 chipset, and then they went out of business before we could launch. And then we used the Mostec 3 chipset, and then they went out of business, and we finally used electronic arrays. I still remember those names because, it took. That's why the launch got delayed, because the companies here were failing at a fairly rapid rate at that time. And what we did was, initially we came out with a simple machine that had 4 functions and square root, a percentage and square root. But subsequently we added our own PROMs and functionality so that we could make machines that were specific to customer needs. So statistical analysis, for example, was a big requirement. So we put regression, mean, median, a single key that you could do, where some of the logic was done by the chipset and some was done by a PROM that we integrated with the chipset. So by using our own R&D, we were able to actually differentiate our offerings to people who were using standard chipsets and charge a premium.
So you were in marketing and sales, that was your responsibility? So were you responsible for defining, how to differentiate the product?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had to give the feedback to the R&D folks, and I was also responsible for our maintenance. And so a lot of things like, hey, use gold plating, don't use single-sided PCBs, use plated through hole, double-sided PCBs, stuff like that. Don't use injection molding key tops. Don't use the cabinet, don't have it extruded. Have a mold made and then make the cabinet so it doesn't crack, So you start learning things in lots of areas that you're not familiar with, but you got to read up and say, hey, what do I need? Because we were making enough money, so I could get the company to invest in some of these things that made the product better, more robust, better looking.
So what was the demand like? Who were the customers?
Everyone. Everyone needed a calculator. Our competition was the the mechanical calculators. Right. And obviously compared to that, this was fantastic. You didn't have to go around 10 times when you wanted to do something.
What about imported devices, or were those
shut
out?
Yeah, the chips were imported.
But finished products, were there any imports from,
no.
The calculators?
India was a closed economy. You couldn't import. You could import parts and build something, but you couldn't import a full computer, full calculator. That changed over time when the pocket calculators came out, and they took a few years to come out. In fact, they took 5 years. What we had also done, because we had a strong R&D, is we had developed our own computer. So on calculators, we built programmable calculators. We did a lot of that. So some of our machines were similar to what the HP 9800s were here, if you remember the HP 9800, which was a desktop programmable calculator. So we had similar machines in India that we had developed. But we had also developed a 16-bit bit slice computer that ran COBOL, Fortran, the usual languages. And obviously we went to the company and said, we want to take it to market. It's going to, because the competition was the 1401s as you saw downstairs. And we thought we were way superior to them. Didn't need that much infrastructure, much more reliable, etc., etc. What happened was, India was a socialist country in those days. We had an act called the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which basically said that no large private companies could get into any new area, and they would be fined, etc., etc. We took the line that programmable calculators, computers, there's no real difference. You can call either call this a microcomputer if you like, but it's just a progression of the same thing. But their legal department's advice, internal legal department advice was that, no, you'll run afoul of the government if you do something like this. Because we were going to compete with government companies, public sector companies as we call them in India, who were making computers. But their technology was, ECIL, TDC 312, 316, was really old. And they broke down quite often and, all that stuff. So that's the time 6 of us who worked there decided that, and microprocessors were just coming out. And we decided that if the company didn't understand how microprocessors were going to change the world in this computing business, we might as well go do it ourselves, because there was no one else doing it in India, and our competition was using very old technology.
So what year was this?
1975.
75. So there were 8-bit microprocessors available, and 16-bit was about to become available.
8-bit and 4-bit.
Yeah.
Both were available. In fact, our first machines were based on the Rockwell PPS-4, the 4-bit machine. And it was a programmable calculator, because that's what we knew, and we built it. So when we left, we built it, we rebuilt it. The good news was, when we at DCM, we had taken it out to the field, and we knew what the limitations in that machine were. So we really hadn't even built our machine. We had it, a prototype in the lab. But we used to tell people to see the DCM machine and then tell them what additional features we are going to give them when our machine comes out. That's how we did our initial.
So there was a restriction on importing computers, but not chips.
Yeah, components were allowed, right? And computers, even today, there are some restrictions on fully assembled machines.
So what you describe in terms of working in a large company, coming up with an idea, a company doesn't want to do it, spin out, do it, is a very common story here in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
But not so common in India at the time.
Yes, no, actually we were probably the first real group that did that.
So what was that like, and what,
It was tough. It was tough. We had no money. We had no business plan.
And what did your friends think, or your family? Or?
My parents were okay. They said, if that's what you want to do, it's fine. I was married. I had a child. The rest of my uncles and aunts, of course, thought I was crazy, because you're leaving a big company. You're doing well there. You've got a stable job, a secure job. You must be crazy to sort of leave it. But two things. One is, I remember telling people that, microprocessors are going to change the world. Right. Change the world was something people thought you must be high on pot or something. Right. So, it's like... But the other thing was that DCM's most profitable unit was their fertilizer plant, where the turnover was something like 100 crores, which is a billion rupees. Basically, a crore is 10 million. And so we said, we got to build our own fertilizer plant. Basically, that was the motivation, that I want to get to 100 crores, a billion rupees in revenue. That's what we've got to build. And that was the sort of, everyone had that vision of that number, not necessarily
as
in fertilizers.
As a computer.
Yeah, that's how we started. We pulled in all our money, 6 of us. We had 175,000 rupees. That would, in those days, translate to $17,500.
And now your family, you've got a wife, and was your wife working?
Yeah, both my parents were working, my wife was working. So to that extent,
so you weren't completely without a lifeline.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, there was no problem, and really, I just thought if it fails, I'll have mud on my face. I can always get another job. But what happened was, out of the 175,000 that we had, you had to have an office in Bombay. 60% of India's taxes came from Bombay. And that was the big market for computers, we felt at least. And Bombay, unfortunately, the structure of renting was such that you couldn't rent, you had to buy. If you rented, you had to give a deposit equal to the value of the, right. Because the rent control was such that if I rented for X years, after that it became mine, I didn't have to get out. And so 125,000 out of 175,000 went to rent this place, an office in Bombay. And working capital was just 50,000 rupees.
How big of office?
It was 953 square feet.
So is this post I think you started in Barsati in Delhi?
Yes, so that's how my grandmother's, in India you're allowed to build 2 floors and then a half floor above that with the rest of the roof. So that, my grandmother's house, that's the part where we started the company originally. Of course, originally we had no money, so we said let's go out and trade in calculators to generate cash to do our development. And initially we thought we'll make our own calculators. Fortunately, what happened was there was this TV manufacturer called Televista. Their CEO, a gentleman called Ved Luthra, he approached us and he said, look, I make calculators, I just am not able to sell them. So why don't you take calculators from me? Why set up your own factory? You sell my calculators. I'll tell you what my cost of production is. You tell me what your selling expense is. We'll take a number halfway in the middle, split the profit. And basically, I'll give you a 90-day credit on my machines. And we'll do our accounting at the end of that and then adjust who made more, who made less, and do that stuff. So basically you had a lifeline, you had, I had a cash flow because I pay only after 90 days. And so that's how we started.
So how did he find you? I mean, you're 6 guys in a 3rd floor
No, but everyone knew us. We were the big gorillas in the calculator trade.
Okay.
So we had 80%,
because of your reputation
80% of the market. I remember the revenues at that time when we left in DCM just for calculators were 172 million rupees, out of which 72 million rupees was our profit. So very profitable.
And you were responsible for distribution and sales.
That's
so
right.
You just picked up where you left off.
That's exactly what we did. That agreement lasted for a year or so with them. What did happen was they didn't want to increase production. We needed more machines, calculators. So he said, go out and build your own calculators. And so we caught someone else and got different models built. And then it got, it ran into rocky weather because not always can you sell every model. Yeah. And so he used to have some stock and he'd get very upset about it and say, no, why don't you sell my machines? Why are you selling the other machines? And so after a period of time that whole thing broke, and he got out of calculators altogether. TVs were doing very well at that time, so he focused on television.
So you had enough funding to move on?
By that time we had enough.
Yeah.
So what happened is...
Now you started in Delhi and you went to Bombay. How far?
It's about 700 odd miles. So what we did was there were 6 of us. So 2 people went to Calcutta, 2 people stayed in Delhi, 2 people went to Bombay. And we said, and we did 2, we didn't go south because we felt that, you can get depressed, things don't work out. So you need 2 people, one to cheer the other one up and say, it's okay. That's how we did it. I think 6 months later, the company was doing really well. So one of the Bombay people went down to Madras, now Chennai, to start that office. I got pulled out from Calcutta and came back to Delhi. And Shiv Nada and Subhash Rao in Delhi, Shiv and I moved out and we started looking at computers, that let's develop our own computer and sell it, while the other people kept the cash flow growing because they were trading in calculators.
And your family stayed in
Delhi. It was we were staying at my grandmother's house. Right. So by this time we had taken over her bedrooms and stuff. So what we would do is roll up the bedrooms in the morning, make those offices, and when we finished in the evening, roll back the bedroom and the living room and all that and give it back to her.
This is the equivalent of the Silicon Valley garage, but instead it was the bedroom of your...
Yeah.
So Shiv Nader
and she became a receptionist. So if someone had to wait, and she would talk to them, and because she had this thing she traveled all over the world with my grandfather and stuff like that. So invariably she'd find some connection which Indians are very good at, and yeah, so that's how.
So Shiv Nader and you were the leaders in terms of the computing.
Yes, so and when we decided to get into computers, the government had restricted the licenses. They said only government companies, public sector or state public sector, could get into computers. So we had to go do what is called a joint sector with the UP Electronics Corporation, which was the state of UP, which is right next to Delhi, to be able to get the permission to manufacture computers. And the model of a joint sector was that they owned 26%, the promoters owned 25%, and 49% was public. But the total equity was only 2 million rupees. So if you had to, 20 lakhs, yeah, that's 2 million. So if you had to go for 9.8 lakhs, which is 980,000 rupees to go public, the cost of going public was more than that. So we ended up owning 74%. So basically the original company was Microcomp. That was what we called, and we called it Microcomp only because that was the name we had given the programmable calculator in DCM, and we'd been telling them to get it registered, and they had been sleeping on it. So because they hadn't got it registered, we decided to take that name. Right.
So I want to go back just for a moment. You left this big company, you started on your own. There was no infrastructure. You could not raise money, so you did this other mechanism to banks and other people. You never had to take a loan, so you were cash flow positive, and you didn't depend on anybody else in the no ecosystem dependence.
Yeah, not in the initial year. Mm-hmm. Once we got into manufacturing of computers, so 1976 August we incorporated what is called, it was Hindustan Computers Limited. It's now called HCL. We shortened, just taken the initials. There we started with programmable calculators, competing with DCM, because DCM in their wisdom then decided to go to the market, right, after we had left. Mm-hmm. And, we knew their machine better than they did. And a lot of the people by this time had left and joined us. And there was another startup in India called Alpha Electro, mm-hmm. who was also trying to make computers, and some of them had gone there. So, how should I put it? By June 77, we had more machines in the market than DCM had. And so we then became the big...
Now, when you say machines, what were these built on?
These were
that's what I was going to
PPS-4 based programmable calculators. Mm-hmm. The DC had a magnetic card reader, mm-hmm. that could store programs and read them. Mm-hmm. DCM's machine had 100 memories and 1,000 steps. Our machine had 200 memories and 2,000 steps. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's what it was. So you wrote a program the way you'd punch it in a calculator, mm-hmm. but the system remembered it and repeated it.
Yeah. So I understand that you also had Winchester disk drives in this versus floppy. Is that?
Yes. So, no, the programmable calculator had a solid state memory.
No, I meant the computer, sorry.
Yeah, we got the computers out only in 77. And the product, the first machine was based on the Rockwell PPS-8. It was called the HCl-8C. It had some unique features. So because we were trying to replace the 1401s, and they had punch card readers, so we gave them a key to mini floppy, 5¼ inch. So we were a worldwide beta site for Shugart's 5¼ inch drive. So everyone in India had 8-inch drives. We had 8-inch on our machines, plus a 5¼ inch to read the offline data entry. So we had data entry machines offline that we sold, which was similar to the IBM structure was similar, that you had data entry and then you instead of cards, you took the mini floppy and put it in the machine and then it read it. And the machine could have it could have one actually, but hardly anyone bought a 1 floppy machine, 2 floppy, 3 floppies, or 4 floppies. And it also had what we called a PSAR, a power shut-off auto restart unit, which really was a truck battery connected into the computer so that when the power failed, it held all the counters where they were and started when the power came back, it started from the point where it stopped. And that was unique.
Very important in India, right?
In those days. And it was unique. And all we had to do was the maintenance engineer had to go every 2 weeks and top up the distilled water in the battery. And so he could
So this was exactly the same time as Apple and all these other companies were coming out with personal computers.
Absolutely.
Yours was not a personal computer. It was meant for
personal.
business applications.
So what was the size of the R&D?
So the machine was a cabinet of about this size. That's all it was. And then, of course, it had a single line display. It had a small 80-column printer. And then you had the big printer next to it. So this was really for the programmer to know what, what sequence he's doing and, stuff like that. Since we were charging a fair amount, we used to ship it with the table, a metal table. And so the engineer used to take, if he took a day to install, more than 4/5 of the day was assembling the table. Then, right? That's sort of how it worked.
So what was the size of the team, the R&D team or design team, development team?
It was pretty big. I think we had 30 or 40 people in R&D. The other thing I should mention is there weren't too many jobs available at that time in India. So a lot of people were coming overseas. We were one of the few people who would go to the IITs, and actually we had 24 key institutions where we would recruit. We only recruited from there. But since we had jobs in India, a lot of people applied. And I think we got some really good people. And, we were working on state-of-the-art stuff. Even the colleges, I remember when I was at Kharagpur, I saw chips in a drawer, but I never really worked with them. Right, but here you're actually working with the microprocessor itself, you're doing, a lot of that stuff. So also at that time, electronics, IT was not the industry parents wanted kids to go to. It was more mechanical, chemical, civil, stuff like that. And the companies were more Levers, Larsen and Toubro, places like that. So only the risk takers would come to someone like HCL. And which is one reason why we've spawned so many startups. Today, I think half the CEOs of the IT services companies in India are ex-HCL folks.
So the expertise for these designs came from originally like when you were at DCM?
No, we had, in fact, we then got a head of R&D, a PhD from IIT Delhi, a gentleman, he's now passed on, S. Raman. And he was the one who ran our R&D and production. And he did a great job. I think he was very high on cost control. I think his assessment of which technology was going to be a winner was very good. We were the first people in India to introduce hermetically sealed Winchester disk drives, as you call them today. We were the first, of course, for the mini floppy. We fought the whole market. There were 14 people in the business, all had 8-inch floppies. We were the only one with 5 1/4 inch. And when it became the standard, everyone would look at HCL to say which way the technology would go, or is likely to go. We were the first with the start-stop spool tape drives, the small ones, not the vacuum column ones that you have downstairs here. But yeah, so we did a lot of things where we were
So there was no competition, basically?
No, there was competition.
So who were the competitors?
So the competition was DCM and a company called ORG, which was Sarabhai's in Ahmedabad. ORG came from a much more technical background, so their sales, but ultimately for the first few years, everyone was selling about 200 computers a year. We were selling 200, ORG was selling 200, DCM was selling 200 odd. That's how it happened. Then we actually got one of our MBA type persons, salespersons, who joined us in '76. He came abroad he wanted to be a teacher, and he's now teaching at some business school in Georgia. He was doing his MBA here after doing his MBA from IIM Calcutta. And he wanted to do a summer project in India. So we told him to come in and work on what are the decision models on which people buy computers. And so he presented a very interesting paper. He'd actually worked in the field, so we thought we didn't have to brief him too much. He said there are 4 types of models. One is a large company where you put in the budget and, it's adaptive planning is what he called it. And then he went on and he said, there's an entrepreneurial model. There are lots of companies, mostly small, some medium, where the one person takes a decision. So if you can get his hot button, if you can say what his problem is, whether it's scrap management or whatever, he'll buy the computer right then. So we then switched our strategy in a way. We were selling to the corporate sector, that continued. We got a whole new group of people, and we got them focused on the first-time user market. That's the ads that you see there. We would give them one application free as part of the. So if he said, I want my financial accounting or general ledger to be done, then that would be given as part of the cost of the hardware. Because the hardware, there was so much profit in the hardware. And it wasn't that we were selling it cheap. Those days it was $364,100 for a machine with one application free, right?
364,000
100 rupees.
Rupees.
Yeah. And what happened is we started outselling competition. So we were now doing 1,000 a year. They were still at 200. So they couldn't figure out what it was. So they dropped their price actually from 300,000, 100,000 rupees to even 100,000 rupees. But they still weren't selling. And at that time, they figured that the way to do it was to recruit my people, and maybe they have the formula, secret formula. Again, you got to remember the market was going through a change. Earlier, our processes, our quality control was probably not as good as the big companies because they come with inherently built-in processes. So, but in the early part of the market, it was innovation that was important. The market had started switching, and process became important, not innovation, right? What is your mean time between failures for your machine? How good is your support, et cetera, et cetera. They were in the wrong cycle. So when they switched and took our people and paid them fancy prices and gave them nice designations, the market has switched to this. And so we already were established and we had already got our processes in place. And so, I think, so in 10 years, we became the largest computer company in India.
So how did that, did you stay in the business market? Did you ever enter the personal computer market? And how did
we
that
did
evolve?
both. We did both. In fact, what happened on PCs was a good example. We had our own small machine that ran DR-DOS, if you remember the SCO operating system. By the way, we also wrote our own operating systems and our own compilers because we technically weren't allowed to pay for software. I couldn't import software. I could import it in source code, which is why Unix became so popular in India over time, but I couldn't import. So we had to write our own operating systems, which is what we did. When PCs first came out, we were late in sort of reading the PC trend. There were a couple of companies that came in a year or so before us, and they priced their PCs at 100,000 rupees, in that range. When we realized that that was the way the whole market was going to go, we actually went to Taiwan, picked up 6 PCs, disassembled them, got them into India, assembled them again, and
You could import them if they were in pieces, but not as assembled units.
And put a label on them, took out an ad saying, hey, we are advertising our PCs we called it Busy Bee. That was our brand name for a PC, at 50,000 rupees. Or was it 35,000? I forget the number, but at a much lower price than anyone else. And obviously we had no machines to deliver. It was going to take us 3-4 months to get the parts and assemble them and stuff. So when we started booking orders, we told people there's so many orders, you've got to wait so long, and everyone believed that. And because
there were so many orders compared to what you had.
Yeah, that's true. But we are seen actually in India, we are seen as the people who are leaders we were seen as people who are leaders in the PC business. Because we got it in at a sensible price, we went for volumes, right, and we had this massive advertising campaign that supported it. What we also did was, the PCs then, of course, become commodities. So now you're fighting the mom and pop shop at the corner of the street who's also giving you a PC. We discovered that 80% of the users used VisiCalc and WordPerfect. They didn't use anything else. And so what we did was, again, using our R&D, we replaced the 8088 with the 8086, wrote some microcode, and called it the BusyBee2, which ran those two applications 3 to 5 times faster than the normal PC. It didn't run any other application. And I think our bill of material difference was 75 rupees, but we priced it at 10,000 rupees more if you wanted, better performance. And I mean, sold a whole lot of them for a couple of years.
You had taken these 6 computers from Taiwan, taken them apart, and then you went and designed your own, the basic clones of those?
We did our own motherboard, and it just took you time to get the parts in.
And that's what you actually shipped as your units.
So going back to the founders, what were they doing? Were they all?
Okay, so Ajay, so what happened was, Pami Puri, okay, in the meanwhile we'd also diversified into reprographics and stuff like that.
I was going to say the printers.
So Pami Puri looked after the reprographics part of the business. Subhash Arora looked after the calculators. Calculators were still running. They were not an important part of the business, but they were positive cash flow. So he was looking after that. I was running the field sales and service. Shiv was running finance, basically, and accounting. And he was the CEO. Raman was running production and R&D. Ajay was running one of our regions. So he ran the South for us. And South became a bigger region than any of the others over time. And who was left? Yogesh. He worked in the financial area, banks, and so he was really focused in that particular area. And he also ran our instruments. We had a instruments division too that we had started. The whole idea was to diversify. That whole concept of if we diversify, we'll do okay. We changed that thinking later. I said, "No, you better focus on computers. The others are just take too much attention, don't get you any real value. They're commodity. There's no real differentiator." So we just got out of the other businesses and focused.
Printer business, were you competing with Xerox? Or?
Yes, on the I've got, so that's a little bit of a story. So what happened was sort of 10 years into the company, we'd gone really big, It was, when I used to send a circular, it would take 1 month for the last office to actually say, "Yeah, I've got it and we're going to do it." And you're not used to it. In a startup, you call people to a room, you tell them, "Hey, let's do this," and you step out of the room and everyone's got the message. So I think, and I realize now that I was going through what is called a midlife crisis. So I talked to everyone and said, I'd got a cottage up in Missouri. It's up in the hills like Tahoe. And I said, let me go spend 3 months there, come to terms with what I want to do in life, because I think maybe I should go back, do a PhD, get back to academics, stuff like that. Then everyone said it's not going to work. So why don't you go and do a course where you learn something and you'll also be able to sort out your head. So I came in early '85 to do the advanced management program at the Harvard Business School. And I think that really helped. Because what I realized there is that I was missing the fun of a startup. I really didn't want to run a big company. It wasn't something that excited me. So when I went back after 13 weeks, I told them, "Hey, don't change the structure you've already set in place. Whoever's running it, keep running it. I don't need to get back to my old job. I just want to do some of the new things that we are looking at. And I'm quite happy to run it with a small team. In fact, I'd rather run it with a small team." So everyone said, "Look," everyone agreed, but they said, "Look, you can't only have fun." So the understanding is if any of the divisions runs into a problem, then you'll have to go and help turn it around, which I thought was only fair. You can't have the other people working and you having fun. And so that's what I did. So we started, at that time, we decided to go into what is called CAD-CAM, a CAD-CAM division. And said we'll do engineering services. Workstations were just coming out. I actually came and signed an agreement with Apollo. And we were manufacturing, we did manufacture Apollo DN 3000s. We called it the Nexus 3000 in India. In fact, did a lot of good work for them. improved their display because we couldn't import the display from Philips, and Philips weren't willing to give it to us in kit form. So we had to go to Mitsubishi, get the display from them, build our own stuff and put that display up, and it was better than the display they had. And if HP hadn't bought Apollo, they were talking to us about taking the display from us. Did a few more things with their machine that were unique to us because we weren't allowed to, I wasn't allowed power supplies, for example. So, you know, you had to live within your restrictions in India. So did the CAD/CAM division, which became fairly wildly successful in the sense that we got the largest order the HCL ever had till then came out of workstations and the software around it, whether it was from Rakel Redak or from Mentor Graphics or whoever. And those things weren't inexpensive in those days. On the other side, we had this reprographics division where we were selling copiers that we had with Toshiba. So we used to get critical parts from Toshiba and build the rest ourselves. Xerox had come in and they were selling copies. We were selling copiers. At some stage what happened was we suddenly fell off a cliff. We were making money and then suddenly you're losing money like crazy, whereas Xerox seemed to be doing quite well. So with that old promise, I got pulled into looking at repro, say what's the problem. In fact, what happened was in one of our board meetings, we said, let's sell the division. And I opened my mouth like a fool and said that, why do you want to sell it when it's not doing well? You sell divisions when they're doing well. So it said, okay, why don't you make it do well, kind of thing. So it ended up with me. What I discovered was the people were very demotivated. And until you can get the people to get motivated, there's nothing you can do with any company, actually, in my view. So it took me 3 or 4 months to get them to start believing in themselves, that if they gave me a target, they'd be able to meet it. And it took 3 or 4 months, because you can't also force it down their throat. In the meanwhile, we were working on getting some new products in. And so once we had a range of products, these people came back where they started believing in themselves a little bit. We then announced our product range, and for the first time in India, we did what is called comparative advertising. And I'm sure you know what comparative advertising is. I mean, I think we got 10 to 20x the mileage of our cost because everyone discussed whether it's ethical or not ethical. And, you know, it became a topic of discussion, including number of panels where I had to go, where the press was, the media was there, and, you know, stuff like that, about this whole thing. But we were able to turn it around within a year to make it the most profitable division that we had, which was nice.
Now, you said you were selling copiers, Xerox was selling copies. Did you change your business model also?
We changed it. We did a hybrid. We didn't change it completely, but we got machines that were far more efficient than theirs, so our cost of copies was lower, and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
So you changed the product line and you changed the business model.
Yes.
Some significant.
And we added. So what we did was, there's a company in Japan called Rizzo, which makes electronic cyclostyling machines. Now, I don't know if you remember what cyclostyling was, but Gestetner had this thing where you typed in on a master, you typed in something and then you cranked models out. Right. This was electronic. By computer, you put something on a master, and then up to 1,000 copies you could take out as if it was a laser printer. And so it was much better quality and stuff like that. It opened markets that we weren't addressing earlier, like internal exams for universities. They don't want the paper to go out, it might leak. So they would do it, you know, they'd buy a machine to do it internally and stuff like that. So sold a lot of those machines, and that's what made that division profitable. Now, while that was happening, we ran into a problem in the US. Now, we had come to the US, I'm sort of jumping around a little bit, but we had, so what had happened was when Unix came into India, we obviously took it, we got the source, so we took it immediately. And then we decided that we will use this for our commercial machines. So we built our own file system on it. We built very similar to the PDP-11 actually. That was our model from which we took the file system. We built our own compilers, we built our own spooler, we did all that on Unix. And the other problem with India was part of the Soviet bloc, so to say, in the Cold War days. And so getting clearances of the latest microprocessors was always a problem. So while the US would clear the 68020 for us, the 030 was not cleared. for a year or two after it came out. But people in India read magazines in English, and they wanted that power. So we ended up developing a multiprocessor machine that gave them that power. But to the user, he ran as if it was a single processor. So the Unix didn't change for the user, but internally the machine was a multiprocessor machine. You could go up to 4 CPUs with the 68020. 4, but 3 was the optimum. 4 if you wanted lots of terminals, basically. Didn't change the throughput by very much. When some AT&T bought Unix in the meanwhile, if you remember. So some VP from AT&T had come to one of our computer shows in India, and he was really impressed by that. And he was quite flabbergasted that we had done so much work on Unix. We didn't realize that that's what we had done. So then we got McKinsey to do a study for us, and they looked at the US market, and they said that, multiprocessor machines cost, MIPS had it, Pyramid had it, those are the names, and they cost about $1 million or in that range. Whereas our machine was a $100,000 machine that we could put out in the market that didn't have that power, but had that kind of capability. And so they recommended that we come in with that machine to the US market. So we lobbied the government, got a $5 million permission because foreign exchange was really tight in India in those days. And we came here. We're still at the same office. HCL still at the same office.
So was that the first move to the US?
That was the first.
Okay.
Yeah, first move to bring ourselves to the US.
Yes.
No, we used to come here to buy parts and stuff like that.
No, I meant to move to the
business.
Yeah. So we came down to, we means HCL is still at 330 Potrero Avenue, just off Central in Sunnyvale. And we came in there to manufacture computers. So we took this office, 33,000 square feet, said we'll set up our production lines here. We got a $50 million OEM order from Fortune Systems. Now, Fortune was a multi-connected word processing, beautiful system, but they wanted to move up. So they wanted us to OEM, take the operating system, put it on our hardware, and Fortune got acquired by SCI. SCI said Intel only, we don't want Motorola, whereas our whole system was Motorola 68000 based. While this was happening, the partner who had come here, Yogesh Vaidya, had to go for a bypass, a multiple bypass. Now, in those days, bypasses weren't as common as they are today. So while he did say, in 10 days, I'll be back in the saddle and I'll be allowed to drive and all, sitting in India, we thought he's unnecessarily putting strain on himself. So we had a discussion. I was sort of in between projects. So I got sent here. Basically I was sent to shut down the company quietly because we'd taken a lot of mileage about how good our computers were. They were going to the US and stuff like that. So when I came here, the first thing I did was said, I don't need my hardware team. There were 9 people, so I laid them off because we obviously were tight on money. We'd already spent $3.5 million out of the $5 million that we had got, that we had been cleared to get, I should say. Then what we had done here was when you are getting your machine to the US, the enabling technologies have to be ported onto it. So I needed compilers, so I was working with Micro Focus. I needed databases, so Unify, Informix. So we were porting their databases, and normally you pay to port. Our deal with these companies was that I'll give you my engineers at my cost. They'll do the multiprocessor extensions on your software, and then they will port it on our hardware. And so the multiprocessor extensions are yours, your IP, we're doing it free for you. But I'm not going to pay for porting. What happened was, when I decided that we were closing down, I called all these companies and said, I'm pulling my engineers. I don't need to, do this anymore. Everyone came back to me and said, we need it done, we'll pay you for it. And so I suddenly had a cash flow. And a nice cash flow, because they were paying me $45 an hour in those days. I'm going back to 1989, right? And so I just kept quiet. I told no one in India And they were very happy. I'm not asking for money, right?
How many people did you have here?
We had quite a few. I think we had about 10, 15, maybe 20 people. I can't remember the exact number.
And how big was the company then, just as a reference? I mean, how big was HCL at the time?
Boy, now,
worldwide?
Now, see, when I came here in 85, we were 80 crores. That's 8 billion rupees. It would have gone to, now this was 89, I think we would have gone to about 20 billion,
20, yeah.
something like that. I'll have to look at the
Very
numbers.
big.
Yeah, but we weren't that big a company, but
So going back to another thought, when you were initially, when you, after graduation, you were thinking of working here, when you got married, you wanted to come to the US, right? And then of course you ended up working in India and HCL and all that. So was there any desire during this time that it vetted your desire to not move to the US, stay in India, or you still had that desire?
You had no time to lift your head up from the field.
Right.
I never once thought of that I'll come to the US. I came here in 76, right after we started, because I'd gone to Calcutta for 6 months. And I told my wife that and she stayed on in Delhi, she was working. I told her, if the company does okay, I'll take you for a holiday to the US. And so the company was doing okay. So in, I think, summer of 76, it was the bicentennial, we came here for 2-3 weeks, basically holiday. And then I came here in 81. And at that time we came to, we wanted to get into mainframes. And there was a company here called 2Pi, which is now Apple. It's in that corner of Stevens Creek and 280. And we were about to sign the deal with 2Pi for hardware, because the IBM operating systems are public domain, the ones that we were going to use, when they got acquired by 4Phase. And so then we came a little while later, by the time 4Phase, and talked to 4Phase. Lee Boisel, I remember, was the guy who started 4Phase. And we were about to sign with 4Phase when they got acquired by Motorola. And I still remember I was there. Motorola acquired them. It was Lee Boisel's birthday, and suddenly this big cake rolls down the corridor, and one stripper jumps out, and whatever. So about a year later, we get a call from Motorola, and we asked Motorola, give us that thing, and they said, no, not right now. We've just acquired it. About 9 months later, Motorola calls us from Schaumburg, Chicago, and said, let's talk about it. We're willing to give you at 15 cents to $1, you can take the parts and build your machine. Actually, we went there, met them, and spent the whole day with them. They take us out for dinner at night, and this guy from Schaumburg is telling us, I feel more at home with you guys than these guys from California. He was shocked that a stripper was in office, But that was California. Well, whatever. We ultimately didn't do it because when we went to India, the government told us that if you get into mainframes, we'll squeeze your supply of chips. We'll delay the clearances and stuff. And we felt that, hey, no use threatening our regular business.
So this is still under MRTCP? Is that?
No, that had pretty much, it was there, but it wasn't implemented.
Okay.
But the government had, CMC was doing mainframes. So they didn't want someone else to come in and start doing it better than CMC. Suddenly, if someone else is doing it, then there's a comparison, you can get exposed. So that was the problem. I was all for it. I was willing to fight Shiv was the one who said, let's not do it. I think he was right. But I was upset we spent so much time trying to get this thing.
So what was HCL's dominant product line or business? I mean, you were in personal computers, you were in a variety of business computers.
Yeah, we were basically personal computers and the servers that were made out of the Intel type chips. Okay. And we had our Motorola machines that we did. We subsequently in 91 it was, yes, we signed a joint venture with Hewlett-Packard, where we took the HP 9800 series and we started manufacturing them in India. So we replaced instead of putting our own investment in R&D in servers, big servers, we worked it with HP. That agreement came because we were doing Apollo. We were making Apollo workstations. Right. HP acquired Apollo. Yep. And we had 80% of the market in India. And HP came to India and figured that they didn't have that kind of percentage anywhere in the world. And if they took Apollo away from us, which they wanted to because they wanted a common strategy on workstations, it was going to hurt them. So in that discussion, they decided that, hey, instead of us taking it from you, why don't you take over and run our computer business in India, which is what we ended up doing.
So then when you said you got out of the hardware when you came here and were doing the extensions and services, was that the seed of the services business?
Yes, that is how HCL technology started. Actually, I didn't, as I told you, I didn't tell anyone in India. I sent them reports and they're very happy that I'm not asking for money. Then when India ran into a recession, and you remember 91, 92, we had a recession all over the world. India had a recession too. First thing that gets hit are computers and office equipment and stuff like that. So they ran into a very tight cash situation. Now, I was making a fair amount of money here, and because I had losses, I was paying no taxes. So I ended up buying their instruments. I didn't know how to send money to them. So I bought their instruments factory, which is at the border of Delhi and Gurgaon, for $1 million. That's how I could transfer the money to them, right? Then they asked questions, where do you get this $1 million from? Then I had to sort of tell them what I was doing. But you know, it's the one other reason why I didn't tell them was, in our mind, engineers were for R&D. Programmers were to write application. You know, so HCL, we always looked at our engineers to do operating systems and compilers and stuff like that. Whereas, you know, you looked at non-engineers who get a little training on languages to be the ones who write application software. That was our thinking. To have engineers do applications was completely alien to us, which is one reason why for many years, and I take the blame for that, we didn't get into applications at all. We were in product design, all that stuff, while Infosys and TCS and Wipro were doing very well in applications. We only got into applications because one of my ex-HCL employees who'd immigrated to Australia landed up here, and he came and he talked to me and said, you know, SAP, he was an expert. He said, let me run it for you. I said, okay, if you want to run it, run it. And that's how we got into applications, which is also the reason why HCL today is doing really well compared to the rest, because the application market is sort of, services market is sort of cooled off, but the product market is really hot. And they've just overtaken Wipro as number 3 in India after Infosys, after TCS Infosys, and now it's HCL at number 3. So that's...
So in terms of overseas operations, you had Singapore and Australia and New Zealand.
No, so I went back to India in let me see. I had, okay, so on a personal level, when I started the company, I told myself I'm doing this because I was creating some uproar in the family, obviously. I said I'm doing this because I want the economic freedom to do what I want to do. And at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I figured some stage in life, I'll figure out what I want to do. But I want the economic freedom to do it when I figure it out. And now I was starting to get close to 50. The internet had just come out. And HCL's strategy on the internet was right. They were a public company. If they were a private company, I probably still would have been in HCL. But they were a public company. And they felt, and rightly so, was let's look at the trend. And once we see which way it's going, then let's invest heavily behind it and try and become a leader in the trend. For me, the fun was fooling around with these new technologies when they were coming out, not waiting for them to become a trend. And so I figured if I wanted to do that, I would have to leave. So I went back to India with the idea of trying to work an amicable exit, if I use that term. And in India, amicable exits are not too easy. So when I went back at that time, we had just started, we had a kind of a startup in Singapore and Hong Kong, and we were just opening Australia and New Zealand. And so when I went back, I said, look, I'll take care of these new areas that are coming up. So that's what I ended up doing.
So what were the areas in those countries? Were they just extension of what was happening?
Well, Singapore and Hong Kong were somewhat extensions. What happened is when we started Australia, the company put in $1, I put in $1 to start the company, right? And then the company said it doesn't have any further resources to give. And so I'd already recruited people, So we decided that we'll change the model a little bit. Instead of just doing services, we'll also do recruitment and placement, because for that you get a 30% or whatever of the salary, which helped my cash flow. So I only allowed three time and materials placements if you got me 2 recruitments. And that's how we grew the model in Australia. And ultimately made it bigger than Europe, which was interesting because we had no. So when I left the company and I was negotiating my release, I told the CFO that please put $1,000 into that as equity, because otherwise I own half the company today. If we end up having a fight, I'll make that a bone of contention claim, half that company is mine. So, just do it before I get tempted to take some action like that, if we ever get into a contentious kind of situation. Didn't happen. I mean, the contentious part didn't happen, but yeah. But yeah, that grew very well. Australia, New Zealand.
So they were doing recruiting?
So what we are doing is placements.
Yeah.
So we would recruit and place people, and you get a 30% recruiting fee, right, of their salary.
Right.
And then we were also doing time and materials placements, because placements is how should I put it? I get paid after, I have to pay the salary every month, but I get paid after 30 or 60 days. So it requires working capital.
Right.
Now, wherever they're going to get the working capital, I got it from the recruiting revenue.
I see.
So that's the model that we do there. My logic is you got to play, the cards you're dealt, you got to play with those. You can't say, I wish I had a better card or something else. I mean, that's how you got to do it.
It's interesting that in Singapore, I read that you work with Walden International.
So Singapore, actually, we had 2 operations. One was the HCL operation. Then HCL, in the earlier days, we had taken a decision, I'm going back to 1980 now, that we didn't want to be a big fish in a small pond. We wanted to be a small fish in a big pond. And so, we weren't I think we were a 3 crore, I forget, we were a really small company at that time. But we decided to go to Singapore and manufacture computers in Singapore. We actually got pioneer status. We were the first computer manufacturer to manufacture in Singapore. The model was very simple. The hardware was manufactured there, but we sold it we sold a solution. We didn't really sell the hardware. And we had a group in Madras, now Chennai, which did the software development. So you captured the specs, sent them here, they did the application development, sent you back the floppy, and then you installed it at the customer site. That was the model that we followed. In Singapore, that entity was called Far East Computers. And 2 of the 6 founders went to Singapore to run that.
So these founders became, key parts of extensions of the business, and went in and solved problems in the United States, or went to Singapore to start things. You were quite a team,
yes,
quite a remarkable team.
Yeah, and they stayed together for 19 years. The first founder left 19 years after we'd started. He decided he wanted to do something on his own, and he decided to leave, and then it sort of split up. I was the second person to leave. I thought I'd retire when I turned 50, and that was my plan. It's just that I didn't plan my retirement, so I got thrown out of the house in 10 days. I still remember my wife telling me, because you start interfering in the house, saying, why is this?
Right.
Yeah.
So she told me, she said, I married you for good. She said, we've been married for 27 years. I've married you for good or bad, but I didn't marry you for lunch. So I'll pay for my budget, go sit in a business center and work from there. Don't, work from home. So I ended up starting another company.
Yes, so let's start with that. This Techspan?
Yeah, what happened was when I left, when I was leaving HCL, so my lawyer, one day I was talking to him, and his tennis partner, who was probably a good friend also, he said he was representing Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs wanted to invest in this industry, IT services industry in India. But they wanted someone to do their industry due diligence. So he said, Goldman Sachs. So he said, would you be interested in talking to him? And I said, I can only do it after I've left HCL. But yeah, I'll talk to him. And so it's funny, when I signed my release from HCL, it was done with some lawyer in New York, I remember. I walked a few blocks and signed my consulting agreement with Goldman. Right, it was, And then, of course, Goldman, it was, I don't know, I feel guilty. Goldman would make you work 3 days a month and pay you your whole month's salary, so to say. I just thought that wasn't right. So, and we did a number of companies in India for them. They wanted a squeaky clean company. Now, India had a myriad of laws. There was no way you could stay squeaky clean. For example, if a foreign exchange invoice was 180 days old, then I had to take legal action. If payment came in the 181st day and I hadn't taken legal action, I was against this law called FERA, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. Right. Now, Goldman didn't want anything like that to touch them. And there was unlikely to be a company in India that wouldn't have run afoul of something at some stage. So finally got fed up, and I think March I left HCL. By June, July, sitting with their partner in Singapore, said, look, it's not going to happen. You're wasting your time, you're wasting my time. If you want something like this, why don't we start a company and keep it squeaky clean? So they said, hey, why don't you do that? So then I had some of these HCL guys who had left and started their own company, and they were telling me come in and become a chairman, and I figured they didn't need a chairman, they needed money. So I told them, hey, Goldman's interested, give me a business plan. So when people hear Goldman, they make the business plan bigger than what it normally would have been. So they pulled in a few other people who worked with us in HCL, here HCL America. And then we gave them a plan which they said they'd fund end October 98. And we decided that we'd do a little more planning and start on 1st of January 99.
This is to start up a IT services company in India.
Right. Well, actually here with the back end in India,
Okay.
US company with the back end in India. Goldman put in, so we negotiated the deal with Goldman in San Francisco with Steve Shafran was the partner. And, I had never negotiated a deal with VC anyone. So I had a friend in Walden who I thought I'll sound him out to see what kind of questions and how it works. But it just didn't happen. In one visit, we sorted the whole thing out. And then he comes back just as we were leaving the office and says, hey, you've been talking to Walden? I said, yes. He said, we've got to cut them into the deal. And so that's how Walden got cut in to the deal a little bit. That company was Techspan. We did, I think, so we started saying we'll do more traditional, we'll do financial service, we'll do telecom, we'll do this. I think a couple of weeks into the market, you realize that was when the bubble was on, that e-commerce was the thing. No one wanted, so we just focused ourselves, let's do e-commerce. We did $1 million in the month in June. That's 6 months after we started. We ended the year at 15.4 million, marginally profitable. Year 2000 calendar, we did 65 million, I think, or 64 million. And we made 4 million of profit.
Yeah, you were developing e-commerce applications for companies.
We were just selling bodies.
Everybody
basically.
was just trying desperately to get into the business. And
yeah, people wanted bodies who understood what it was. Right. And yeah, we did some work. We had a mobile e-commerce. We used to call it M-commerce. And we had some stuff, but that wasn't what was selling. In fact,
they were buying Sun workstations and all that stuff like crazy.
Yeah. So, it was, no one understood what was going on. Everyone thought brick and mortar is going to die. And, the bubble, if you remember. Yeah. We were fortunate because we were supposed to go public at some crazy price, but we were being discounted because we were making a profit. Right. And that sort of went against my grain because I come from India. You can't be discounted for making a profit. And so we didn't go public, thank God, which is why we survived. And then, the bubble vanished end of 2000. We had that 4 million in our cash, which supported us throughout. And then I think it was late 2001, decided you can't, at that time it was 3 months later, it's going to come back again, the economy will come back again. We didn't come back for 9 months, said, hey, we better think of something else. So we then acquired the back end. So there was this investment bank from Europe called DRKW, and they had set up this back end in India where they recruited only the top people from the top institutes and paid them top dollar. So if your JE rank was, your joint entrance exam rank in the IITs was over 300, they wouldn't touch you. So, they recruited some really smart people, built a back end in India where they taught them the innards of an investment bank. And in the meanwhile, we decided as a strategy that we've got to go after one segment, and we can't be a Me Too company, we have to be domain. So we did a strategy called asset light, and I'll explain what asset light is. Everyone was getting laid off at that time, including people from Goldman and Morgan Stanley and stuff like that. So we'd go to bars in New York and talk to people. And we'd be talking to some of these customers. So Goldman would say, I need someone in municipal bonds for my municipal bonds group. And we'd find that we're talking to someone from Morgan Stanley who's been laid off from municipal bonds. So we'd tell him, why don't you come with us for this call? I'm not going to pay you. That's what asset light was. But if we get the job, then I'll put you on my payroll. And so that guy was willing to do it because he was doing nothing either. He was laid off too. And so we got a lot of jobs and we didn't get a lot, But the good news is when the economy came back, the people who we tried to help remembered. And all of a sudden, that became a market for us, the investment bank market. And we were seen as domain specialists because we used to get people who knew the domain to customers. The other thing that had happened is there's something called recall. So what happens is when Goldman or Morgan look at their books at the end of the day, they realize, they are 500,000 IBM shares short. They'll go to Morgan Stanley or someone and say, hey, can I borrow 500,000 IBM shares because I've got to balance my books. Now, at some stage, Morgan Stanley is going to want them back. That's called recall. So most people make recall very ineffective. So it's all manual. You leave a voicemail, so I didn't get your voicemail. I sent you a fax, so I didn't get the fax. They want to be the last people to get recalled, to send the stuff back. Goldman decided that they wanted to automate this, but they couldn't automate it here. So we were running it out for them in India every day, and we'd give it back to them. And when the industry decided to go, right now it's T+2, or it was T+2, to go T+1 and then T+0, that means that you've got to settle within one day or immediately. Goldman at the SIA, Securities Industries Association, Goldman presented us as experts on recall. That we'd been running it for 4 years. So all of a sudden we got positioned right. Right, and the company we merged with Headstrong, so we took the name Headstrong because they had consulting kind of. That then became a market. In India, DRKW got acquired by Dresner, who got acquired by Allianz. And in their wisdom, Allianz decided to withdraw from Asia and focus on Europe. So they were laying off this group in Bangalore. We found out, I think, 3 or 4 days before the pink slips were going to be issued. We went in and did what I call a soft acquisition. We took over their lease, we took over all the equipment, and we gave offers to all the employees. And so all of a sudden, I had domain expertise in India, which even an Accenture didn't have. So I was able to go and...
How many people did you acquire in that?
There was something like 40, 50 people in there. I mean, we figured, we did this in September or October. We figured we'd break even with them. We had to support them for 6 months from a cash point of view. And if we didn't, it would sink the company. But we were quite confident that, I have this expertise in India, no one else has it. People are going to come to me because they're sacred cows that they can't give to anyone else. And so that worked out really well for us.
So this is still under Headstrong?
Well, this was Headstrong. This is what we did. We grew it to about 220 million. And then
220 million or 220?
220 million. And then Genpact acquired us for 550 million in May of 2011. A lot of people had lock-ins. I left pretty much immediately.
So
a few
what
months
company
later.
is that? Genpact is based where?
Genpact is the GE backend that they took public in India. It's a it's a BPO company basically. They wanted to get into it. It's public here, and it has the symbol G. When Gillette got acquired, G became available. Genpact is G on the New York Stock Exchange.
So then you were out of a job again.
Yes. So So first thing I did was we were trying to acquire expertise in insurance. So there was this insurance company in Hyderabad that we had talked to, and he was selling product licenses and then doing implementation, but his accounts were under India GAAP. Now India GAAP, the license fee I can take into my revenue immediately. Under US GAAP, if I have a 24-month implementation for that license, 1/24th of it has to come in. Right? So his P&L looked really attractive because he was getting the $1 million things that were coming into his profit immediately. Whereas if I tried to acquire him, I'd have to look at a US GAAP number, and trying to convince my board to pay that price to acquire them wasn't going to work. So we didn't acquire them, but they were a really good company. I thought they were in a nice niche, and So when I left, he talked to me and said, why don't you come in and help us get acquired, basically. And so we, 9 months later, we sold them to Ebix for $74 million, $20-odd million company. So, yeah. So that's one thing. And then got involved in startups. I have this healthcare thing that I talked to you about.
Right.
That the old ex-HCL guys, they first talked to me in 2007. That time I was just at a high level telling them what I think they should do. I got a little more involved once I had more time.
So let's talk about that.
Yes. So, of course, meanwhile, you've been recognized by a lot of institutions and entities for your achievements. You got the Albert Einstein Award from Jerusalem. You have been given a lot of honorary PhDs.
One honorary PhD.
One honorary PhDs.
And one honorary Doctor of Science.
Okay. So anyway, congratulations for all of that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the startups and your current passion.
So I'm actually spending about 25% of my time with this company called Magic Software, Magic EduTech. They're basically in the K-12 space. They're digitizing content for the K-12 area. They work with the large publishers. And our basic differentiator expertise, if I use that term, yes, we do the digitization, we do the animation, we do all that, but is accessibility, certifying, doing quality assurance, and certifying the digital content for accessibility, so that the learning disabled, and they're about 20% estimates are in US schools, can use that content to learn, basically, effectively. That's what Magic does. That's what I'm actually chairman on the board. One of my Headstrong, the guy who headed our New York and London, Europe, Aki Kamdar, he is the CEO, and he takes care of most of the field operations. I just help him run the back office. In India, we had to set a lot of things right. The company had to transition. Actually, it was a pure content company, and the market was changing. It had to go more towards engineering rather than just content. It was a 25-year-old company and so you've got a lot of old people, people who've been there for a long time, who come from that background, not likely to change to the new requirements. So you have to work out. You can't just one day tell them to go. You have to work it out slowly. So I was helping him get that whole thing.
So when you say engineering, what do you mean?
So today, so what you're doing is you're not just doing content. You're saying, how do I take it out to people? How do I make it? How do I show it on a mobile device? How do I show it how does it should look the same, whether it's on a tablet or a PC or whatever. Then how do I know? And today I have the ability to say how many people logged into that chapter, how much time did they spend on each page, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that is very useful for the publishers, because then they know how to price their stuff and things like that. Of course, the problem in the US is a little different. Students and their parents want digital content. Teachers are not ready for it as yet. So you have some other issues that are on the ground that are different, but everyone wants that content. The problem today is the economic model for the content is not very good, so they're not willing to pay very much for it.
Right.
And that's an issue.
I was wondering, how do you make money in this? I mean, is it?
So it's So it's one of those businesses where you need a few experts and a lot of people who can be fresh. And so your costs are not that high. And a lot of people, that's why you need to be specialized in something where you actually make your money.
And what's the name of this company?
Magic Software.
Magic Software.
It's called Magic Software.
And how big is it? What's the
It's about,
scale?
It'll be about 10, 12 million in that range. Their fiscal year is March. They should end at about 12 million.
And most of the work is done in India and a few people in the United States?
Yes. So we have about 10, 12 people in the US and the rest, about 300 people in India. But yes, we are, so actually the unique positioning we have is we are domain experts in content and we know engineering. Now, the big companies know only engineering. They don't have the content domain. So when I go to these publishers, if they need, and if I can position it right, they all want people who understand their business. I understand their business. Although I'm a much smaller company than an HCL or a Cognizant or whatever. And we are pulling jobs from them now. In fact, right now, if someone wants to give us $100 million job, I don't know how we can take it or how we'll do it, but $10 million company.
It's always a challenge.
Yes,
let's take it.
Yeah.
So in the field of healthcare, I think that's your other passion. Maybe you can say a few words.
Yeah, that's where I'm spending actually 75% of my time. Basically, we started this company called Evolco, EVOLKO, and it initially started as a EMR company, electronic medical records. But slowly, as we got more expertise and we built our own back end, for lack of a word, I'll call it an expert system that actually, and we're now adding AI and analytics and all to it. But basically, we've captured information from doctors in various fields and can now ask most of the triaging questions that you need to ask, which saves time with the doctor. So we can do it to people remote. We can, if doctors have too many patients, we can help them saving patient-facing time, because a lot of it can be done by someone who doesn't know medical technology or medical science at all. But the system does it for them. So that's really what it's fairly effective. We are able to do it because the volumes in India. You're able to do it at a very, very low cost. That's affordable for everyone. But the volumes justify the numbers. It's very much C.K. Prahlad, bottom of the pyramid, if you remember those concepts. Yeah, it's exactly that. And, for a small amount, for $1, half a dollar per transaction, if I use that term, you get the number of transactions are so large that you get a whole lot of stuff. We also have monitoring software. So let's say the doctor decides, even here, so let's say you've got a heart condition. You go to your cardiologist, he looks at you, he said, you're fine, okay, see me after 6 weeks. Now, unless you have an emergency in the 6 weeks, he doesn't know what happened to you. But if he could find out how your blood pressure went or whatever, 3 or 4 parameters went, and he has that data, his ability to diagnose and give you the right medicines is a lot better. So we do that. And it's very simple to do. It's actually one of the areas where it is going to be applied here very quickly. Is insurance companies have said that for inpatients, if they come back to the hospital within 30 days or some period, they're not going to pay for it. It's the hospital's cost. So hospitals really want to monitor patients who've left the hospital so that they can do preventive work. So for example, a surgical patient, he takes his temperature, it's 99. If I was the patient, I'd say 99 normal, might be a problem with the device or whatever. But to the doctor, it could be the start of an infection. So the system's intelligent enough to give an alert to the doctor with a snapshot of the medical history. The doctor can then decide, call the full record, whatever he wants, decide if he needs to take action, call you to the hospital or whatever. That becomes...
So that would be an avenue to bring it to the United States?
Absolutely,
is that the...
Absolutely. So there are a number of other avenues. We've also got, let's say for diabetes, we also do meal planning for them. Try and suggest meals that fit in what the doctor feels were right for them. We're talking to people here and they want that done. A lot of oncology hospitals want their patients monitored. We've even got a request from a psychiatric facility where they want their patient monitored. Now I have to build that expertise into the system. And so we're working with people. We've gone into nephrology, we're working on dialysis, we're working with doctors to build. I have to build my system before I get to that discipline. And that's what we do. So right now we are in a number of disciplines and we keep adding every few weeks we add new ones.
Palliative care is another one.
Yeah. Yeah, there are lots of. The problem with the US is, number one, I've got to make it HIPAA compliant. I've got to make sure that I do that certification, which we don't need to do when we're outside, although I think we are HIPAA compliant because we work with Amazon and people like that who are compliant. I have to also, put it on iOS. Right now I'm only on Android, so I have to put it on iPhone because there are a lot more iPhone users here, unlike India where there are a lot more Android users. Right. So those are some of the things. And again, you have to decide your priorities. You've got a limited number of resources. Right now we're up to a year's in India. And right now we've just opened a diabetes lab in the UK, which has 13,000 patients. He's just put his first 50 patients on. And he's threatening to take it to, by May, if it's effective, he wants to take it to NHS and try and make it a standard for the National Health Service in the UK. Which means that then I won't have breathing time for another couple of years. Yeah, but it's nice.
But it's nice.
Keeps me young, I guess.
So, any parting thoughts on what the future generation should be doing once they select a career?
No, a lot of the millennials look at life very different to the way we look at it. And a lot of the new Z generation, I think, or whatever they call it, it's very different because now when I talk to people when we try to market something, you got a different message for the three segments: the baby boomers, that's people like us, the millennials, and they have their ask from life is different, and what they're willing to do is also different. So I don't expect a millennial to come in and work 12 hours a day for a week, just because it's needed and it'll make a difference somewhere. They have their priorities seem to be different. And so I think, technology has become infrastructure today. When we look at, the government was thinking in India of putting up technology, data highway between every village. It hasn't happened, but they had very ambitious plans. So you're always looking at that highway, what application can I put on it? And we were thinking, I can do healthcare, I can do this, I can do that. Because if I've got a broadband highway connecting every village, then I can do a lot of things that I'm not able to do the way it is today. So, it is basic infrastructure. You can't argue with that anymore.
I'd like to sort of jump back to one of the things we're looking at is the whole world of entrepreneurial ecosystems and entrepreneurship. And I'm a similar generation to you and running tech companies, and we were hiring Indian engineers. Everybody was coming to the United States, and you were the one who stayed home and started your own company. Were there any other tech entrepreneurs that you collaborated with or shared stories with at the time?
Yeah, there were some. But, none of them, how should I put it? It's very easy to get comfortable in India once you earn a certain amount of money. Mm-hmm. So, for example, this $10 million company, Magic, I make $2 million of profit. Okay, while you pay your tax, you make 1.5 or some number like that. Mm-hmm. Now, if I was the owner of the company and I took half that money out, very comfortable life in India if you're earning that kind of money. And in India in the earlier days, it was tax-free. All foreign exchange earnings were tax-free. So a lot of people didn't really create a big company. They were quite happy to keep it small and live a very
company is what we call it, right?
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. That's exactly what. Right, and a lot of mid-sized IT services companies in India are lifestyle companies. Mm-hmm. Because when I left Headstrong, when we sold it, I had my team. I talked to some of them and said, hey, I've got a team, I can come in, we'll I mean, obviously we take some income, salary, but I'll do it mainly on stock price appreciation. But none of them were really interested. I mean, they talked, but it didn't, because, you know, they're having their annual resorts, they're taking their holidays, company gives them a good lifestyle, they get dividends. Dividends in India are tax-free in your hands, the company pays the tax. So they didn't feel the need to give a return to their other shareholders. But the other shareholders are happy because they're getting dividend, right, which is tax-free for them. So it just didn't. So there are lots of these lifestyle companies that are around.
So is that different today than it was when you were starting out, 40 years ago?
No, it's the same. But you have more people who now want to grow companies. Earlier there weren't too many people who, growing a company takes a toll on your work-life balance, if I use that term. Yeah. My children have still not forgiven me for not spending enough time with them. I still hear about it at least once a week. There's something comes up, and
how many children do you have?
Two. And a part of it comes up because you spend more time with your grandchildren than you never did that with me, kind of. Yeah, but that was the way it was, And fortunately, we lived in the same house, so they had cover. My wife had cover. Otherwise, I don't know if I could have spent those hours in the field away from home.
And she didn't want you at home anyway when you finally did come back, right?
Yeah, but she threw me out.
So what have your children done?
So my daughter taught at Stanford for a while. She did her master's in microbiology, and then at Stanford, and then decided that's not what she wanted to do. So then I told her, she said, should I do a computer science master's? Should I do an MBA? I said, go work for a while and then decide. And then she worked for a while, found the person she wanted to get married to, got married, and taught at Stanford for a while. Actually taught in the languages department at Stanford. And then when she had her kids, the elder one is autistic, so borderline autistic, so she's now a full-time. She's now talking, he's 11 now, so she's now talking about, hey, maybe I should get back to the workforce in some way. And my son worked with KPMG for a while. Then he worked with an investment bank in India, then with a couple of startups, then decided to start his own fund. And so he's a hiker. He goes hiking very often, so he needs something where he doesn't want to give a full, he can manage his own time. He met his wife. He's married an Italian girl. They met hiking in Nepal in the Himalayas. So he does that I think he does that as his job. The rest is a hobby.
These are your two millennial children who you find out what they...
Yeah, but they claim they're not millennial because millennial is 1980s and up. They're born in 74 and 77.
I see.
So
okay. They were born much earlier.
Yeah.
So
that, I think what has, to answer your question, I think when I look back and say, what are the greatest achievement a company like HCL did in India, is number one, it showed that by being a professional and transparent company, you can still create wealth for a lot of people, for the founders, investors, etc. I think very important message, knowing India the way it was before that. And I think the second thing is, for a lot of middle class people, it broke the glass ceiling, that they couldn't step out and start their own company and do things like that. And I think the IT industry has really helped in enhancing that. I mean, HCL is not the only one that did it, but the IT industry did that. And so there's a whole group of people today who think that they can start a company. Some of them want to do it straight out of college. Some of them want to do it even before they finish college, stuff like that. But there's a whole group of people, I think I would count them at 300 million or more, which I call the lower middle class and stuff, who still are very security conscious, who still need a job, and actually they feel they want a government job because they think it's secure in India, gives a pension, all that stuff. I was hoping the BPO industry will break the glass ceiling for them, because that's what employs a lot of them. And if some of them see it, and
BPO?
The business process outsourcing.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. I thought that would break that glass ceiling for them. Actually, what's happening is now with the robots coming in, a lot of that repetitive work will get done by hopefully will get done by robots. So you'll have to think of how to make it efficient, whether you go platform or how are those people going to, how is their business model going to evolve as you go forward.
So what's the state of venture capital and what's the availability of venture capital in India?
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. You can get it. Yes, they ask a lot of questions. They tend to be a little, well, it's changing here too. They tend to be a little more conservative than they are here, right? But it's changing.
Are they extensions of U.S. or Silicon Valley companies, or are there any indigenous ones?
They're both. There are some extensions of Silicon Valley companies. I think the angel activity in India is a lot more active because there are a lot of people my age who did get into the IT or industry. A lot of them have done well, whether they got it as stock options in companies that didn't start or they started companies, and they are starting to become angel investors. And the model is a little different to here. The angel investor just doesn't invest. He also gets involved in a way with the companies. More than just sitting on the board, tends to be a little more hands-on. And so they don't do too many investments, but they try and be.
So what is the differentiation now between TCS, Infosys, and HCL at a higher level?
So I think TCS is pretty rounded. They do everything. They do engineering services, they do application services, they do all that stuff. I mean, they are the big gorilla in the room. Infosys is still a lot more application. They're 90 or some big percentage application oriented. They may do some engineering work, but large part of it is application. HCL is the other way around. Much more engineering, a lot less application. I think that's the basic difference. Now, of course, it's changing. HCL is starting to do more applications now and stuff like that, but yeah. Also, I think HCL became big in the infrastructure outsourcing business. And the reason they became big was when the National Stock Exchange came up, they outsourced all their infrastructure. And HCL did that as I remember doing that bid. I remember the amount of issues we had in-house when we did it. Whether we should do it, not do it, is it ever going to will it sink the company, what would it do? But they did a good job on that. In fact, what we did was we made a separate subsidiary to do it in case it backfired, then at least the rest of the company won't get into trouble. But it did really well. They then merged that unit back, and all the last 3 or 4 CEOs of HCL Tech have come out of that unit, HCL Comnet it was called. But we basically ran the entire infrastructure for the National Stock Exchange, right? And so they learned how to do infrastructure outsourcing and management, which is what they're big in today.
Are any of the 6 founders still with the company?
Shiv Nadar is the only one who's still with the company. He's the chairman of HCL.
I was trying to get him and Arjun together.
Yeah, well, sounds like there's more than one story here.
Yeah.
And actually, one issue that is pretty common with those 3 right now is the H-1B visa issues.
And L visa, both. Yeah.
L visa.
Yeah, but it'll hurt them. If you close it all of a sudden, it will hurt. It'll hurt any Indian and any of the large Indian companies. But a lot of them are starting to recruit locally now. I think what's happening is, I've always been go domain. Let's talk to the business guy, not to the IT manager, but the business manager, and then use technology, IT as a solution to, as a something to provide the solution. Now, whether I use C# or C++ or whatever, it shouldn't really matter because I'm solving your business problem for you, right? That's how I've always wanted to look at this, right? But really, if you look at it, the lower your bill rate, the more money you make as a percentage, not in absolute terms. Because, when I really take an engineer, I have to pay a certain salary. But when I take a BSc, a Bachelor of Science type of person, my salary can be really low, but I can get him to do 80% of the job an engineer does if it's in application programming. So as you go to BPO, your margins are actually better. Your profit amount might be smaller. That is changing. What's happening now is that customers are no longer saying, I want cost saving. They're saying, I want value add. What value are you adding to me? And so all of a sudden, companies have to start thinking a little differently, which is one reason why last 2 quarters, a lot of people, there was no increase in the number of employees in the IT services industry. In fact, a lot of people got laid off because they were considered that they're just bionic programmers. They're not going to be able to scale and understand a business. Right.
So is there a difference between US and Europe in that regard, in terms of the requirements?
Europe is still very parochial. I mean, if you say I want to take, and I'm dealing with a company right now in Vienna, and we say we want to take the job to India, they get upset, they don't like it. But if you take it to East Europe, they're okay with that. Now, initially I thought it's because, how do I put it? I don't know if you've been to East Europe, but the morals are pretty loose there. I mean, when you get in at Budapest airport, they're throwing these massage booklets into your thing and all that stuff. I thought maybe it's like a vacation for them, that's why they like to go to East Europe. But I think it's more than that. I think it's, they just, which is why it hasn't picked up. And then the languages create a problem also. It's, you know, they expect you to do it in French and German and whatever. And that's an issue. England's not Europe for that. UK stays, yeah. But yeah, it's been slow. But once you get in with a European customer, I mean, I would put it like Japan. Once you get in, you have to do something really bad to get out. Europe also, it takes a little time. US is a lot easier for people to change vendors.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and sharing your story and so forth.
Not at all. I'm sorry. I did all the talking. I thought you were
No. That's why you're on the camera.
You're on the camera.
So you get me back to the old days.
So I have one more request for you. So one of the things that I here at the museum, I work with what's called the Exponential Group, where we're looking at not only the people who have, you know, the museum is typically focused on the engineers, the scientists, and so forth, the people that have created the technology. The Exponential Group's goal is to expand that horizon to include the entrepreneurs like yourself. You never got to do engineering, right? You did all
very little. I did a little bit in CAD/CAM and stuff like that, but I never really.
Yeah, same with me. So anyway, so we are expanding our horizons to include people like yourself, the entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the venture capital people and others. And amongst those, we have this little side project where we ask, you know, what is the one word of advice that you would give an entrepreneur?
So there's a word in India, it's called jugaad, which basically says that you have to deliver, you have to reach your goal within the limited resources and whatever you have. That's all you have, and you have to, you know, so it's taught in, I know it's taught in Haas, it's taught in business schools now, because frugal engineering is a good example of jugaad.